Welcome to In Conversation with writer and editor Sheila Bender, discussions on the writing life, a monthly chat with writers, publishers, and those who support the literary arts.
Hello, I'm Sheila Bender, and today we have with us by telephone Ruth Folit, speaking to us from her Sarasota, Florida office. She's a person who started journaling while she was in college, and that's about 40 years ago, she bravely reports. Eventually became the creator of LifeJournalsoftware, as well as founded and directs an organization called the International Association for Journal Writing, or its initials IAJW.org. Ruth, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sheila. Great to be here.
I'm really looking forward to talking about journaling with you. I do think it's very brave of you to report that you've been journaling for 40 years, because as you know, that dates us.
Well, if you saw my gray hair, you'd know I have nothing to hide.
All right. See, now you could have been hiding out here.
Yeah, I could have.
Right. But that's quite a commitment to journaling. So perhaps I could begin by asking you about that commitment, how you've sustained it, and then we'll move into questions I have to ask you about what prompted you to spread the word about journaling and to facilitate people journaling using the LifeJournal software. So let's start with you and journaling and your commitment to it.
Good question. Well, it's interesting. You know, I say I've been journaling for 40 years, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I've written in my journal every day of those 40 years. Certainly
right.
I haven't. And I must admit, I haven't even written every year. But I've certainly had that as a tool in my sort of life toolkit, or to use as something that I feel really comfortable about and feel I can rely on as a part of being a human being in the world. So if I'm ever in a situation where I am in doubt, uncertain, looking for some inner guidance, when I want to have a conversation with myself, when I want to stay in touch with myself, if I'm having trouble sleeping, writing in my journal is just a fabulous way to smooth out the bumps of life. And so I turn to that many times, and I also try to use it not just for the bumps of life, but for the everyday, who I am, part of life, and for triumphs and victories along the way. I think that's critical, that you see journaling as a tool for all different aspects of life.
It is, and I admire that you can do that. So I have this question. Was there something about college or being college age that had you starting?
Good question. Well, I went to a school that was one of those sort of experimental lefty schools of the 60s. It was called New College in Sarasota, Florida, and I started school there in 1970, actually. And when I got there, I noticed that many people were walking around with this notebook under their arm, and I was thinking, what is? I didn't even have a clue what it was. And of course, I asked a few questions of people who had them, and I got the idea, I get it, this is a great idea, let me try it. And so I did, and it just was such a fabulous use, a tool for expression. I didn't grow up in a household where expression and emotions were really highly valued. It was much more of a thinking household, and so it opened up a whole new world for me that I can't imagine entering in another way. I'm sure there would have been some other opportunity, but this was a perfect one for me. And I wasn't considered really a writer either at that time, and so it just opened a world, my interior world. And I do think that college is a time for that in any event.
So did you have any instruction in this, or go to any sources, or talk to some of these people about how they wrote?
No, I didn't. I just fumbled my way through, and in fact, I have one of my the earliest journal. It's a spiral notebook that's not the full size, but sort of 6 by 9 inches, and in there is the seedling of LifeJournal, actually, and it says, and I wanted to write, I kept everything in my journal, including class notes, and so it was a big mishmash of stuff, and I said, and I don't have it right in front of me, but the journal paraphrase, that entry was something like, I love the use of using this journal, but I have to figure out a way to make it a little more organized. And here I am, 40 years later, and there's a solution to that problem, actually, which segues into the journal software LifeJournal that I created back in the late 90s. And it does solve that problem. It has, an organizational side to it where you can assign topics to entries, and then you can go back and search for common threads, and it just changes the whole complexion of journaling.
So you created a product out of your own growth and longing to solve that problem.
I think that's how people oftentimes, products are created because of solving problems that, any of us have.
Right.
This was early in the sort of life of personal computers, so we've gone through a lot of changes over the years, but it's still the same general concept where it's a private place. You can, password protect it. That's another issue of journaling, is, you want it to be a place where you're writing honestly and freely. And it's hard to do that even when you think no one's looking. It's harder, of course, when you think someone might be snooping, but it makes it a lot easier when you know it's really private, and LifeJournal is password protected and encrypted.
So another secondly good solution besides the organization is the privacy. And I know that some of the problem with journaling is just finding out what you have to say. You were very open to it as a college student, but some of the people that I've worked with recently say, well, I don't write because I'm not sure I'm ready to hear from myself. I might find out some startling things.
Well, I think you and I have actually had this conversation once or twice about anybody at any time. When one writes, it's always a leap of faith on some level. It's always a surprise. It's always an adventure. And there's two sides to an adventure. It's the fun and exciting side, and there's also the scary, anxious side. And I guess that sort of encapsulates life also. So you have to sort of, figure out how you're going to go through the anxiety and get to the fun. And
Right.
sort of flip the switch from fear and anxiety to adventure and excitement and creativity and empowerment. And I think a journal is a fabulous tool for that.
So that leads me to a second question, which is, and you're touching on it right here, is what do you most value about journal writing?
Well, for me, it's really a safe place to write without anyone breathing down my neck. I have, I've had experiences I'm sure we've all had of, parents, teachers, older siblings, making fun, ridiculing, or just generally disagreeing in a passionate way about how you feel or think. And this eliminates that. It just allows you to be your full self without any worry about what anyone else thinks, and it's yours and yours alone. And that's, again, freeing, empowering, it's fun, and it's a playground in a certain way for any thinker, any writer, any feeler, any human being.
Right.
It's really a playground where you can explore your own feelings and thoughts. And it's a wonderful dumping ground, in the best sense of dumping ground, of whatever emotion, wild ideas, expansive dreams you have that, are too tender to put out into the world, perhaps.
I moved to tell you about an exercise that I do sometimes with people because of what you mentioned about the critical parents or teachers, older siblings, whoever it is that ridiculed you or made you feel badly about your own power. So one of the things that I've developed is a little exercise that's a dialogue that's kind of fun to do. You take a person, you have a person in mind who is one of those people who has incredible power over you or over your self-esteem or your thoughts about yourself. It could even be a pet. Sometimes our pets have incredible power over us. And you have them say what they normally say, which are the words that you find irritating or putting down. And you answer each one of these remarks they make with a cliche. So, for instance, if your critical teacher said, your writing stinks, all these pages are horrible, you might answer with, well, a bird in hand is better than two in the bush. Mm-hmm. So that you're constantly coming back with a cliche, which we're taught not to do as writers, but they're incredibly powerful when you're trying to turn off the voice of someone who's criticizing you, because it kind of says, you know what, there's common wisdom about this. and I can stand up for myself by using these cliches. So I just wanted to put that out there over the airwaves because of your very passionate argument that journaling is a place where it's your own private world and you have the right to feel and say what it is that's on your mind and in your heart. And that's going to segue for me into another problem I think you solved after your software development was creating this association for journal writing, an international association. That came out of some feeling issue desire of yours, I'm sure. And I'd like you to tell us a little bit about why you created it and what it's doing for those people who journal.
Sure. About 3 years ago, while I was waiting for our programmer to create the next version of LifeJournal, which is out, it's LifeJournal 3, which you, by the way, can download a free trial at LifeJournal.com. I was thinking and doing a lot of reading about the process of journaling. And you asked that question early on, like, how did you, what did you do how did you get started in journaling? Did you just jump in? Well, the thing about journaling is it's a solitary sport. You're pretty much on your own, fumbling, groping, and gleefully finding your way through. And however, as in anything one could do, there are people who have studied it and learned best practices, and one could learn from that. So there are many books out there. One of which is, or several of which are yours, actually. One was A Year in the Life, Journaling for Self-Discovery, and the other one was Keeping a Journal You Love. There are books by all kinds of folks, from Marlene Shuey to Christina Baldwin, Gabriella Rico, Kay Adams, Eric Maisel. These are people who are journal experts on some level, all different aspects of journaling. And I did a lot of reading, and I had this idea that it would really be cool if people had an opportunity to learn about the different ways that you can journal. And I would be remiss by not mentioning Ira Progoff as well. Ira Progoff is one of the sort of the grandfather of therapeutic journal writing. But people, of course, he died, I think, in the mid-'70s, but people, of course, use that as a springboard. So there's all kinds of angles and viewpoints about keeping a journal that would, of course, benefit the journal writer. Just like a swimmer goes to a swimming coach to improve their swimming, a journal writer could go to this association, the International for Journal Writing, to learn more about the process. And in fact, not only do we have a bunch of articles, many articles, close to 100, about all different aspects of journal writing. Some articles have information about the research that backs up the evidence that journal writing improves one's health, one's memory, one's ability to learn. There's articles about travel journaling, about writing, being a writer, and journaling, about a whole host of things. And we also do telechats once a month with these experts.
Right.
So it's a wonderful, I call it a playground of with all kinds of equipment for people to play with and learn about journaling.
You are listening to KPTZ 91.9 FM, Port Townsend. In case you have just joined us, you are listening to Sheila Bender and Discussions on the Writing Life. Today, Sheila is interviewing Ruth Folit, the creator of LifeJournal and founder of the International Association of Journal Writing.
I like the image of the playground because journaling, although we can get into some pretty emotionally tight and dark subjects, is also a pleasure, because there is always some pleasure in articulating what's true for you. I remember the poet Marilyn Chin was being interviewed about a poem she wrote about the murder of girl children in China. And it's a very sad poem from the woman's point of view, whose baby's just been born and her husband's taking the baby out to kill the baby. And someone asked her, how does she feel after writing that poem? And she said, of course she feels sad, and that's why she wrote the poem. But there is always a pleasure in telling the truth, and there is always a pleasure in using language to tell it. It makes us feel healed in some way. There is nothing we can do about lots of the sadness in human experience, but to be able to articulate it is very helpful. So I admire that you moved with your age, Ruth, and your gray hair and your mastery into helping large numbers of people access this material by taking a storehouse. 40 years worth of journaling means not only that you have lots of journals, but you've got all this information, and you've been able to connect people through your organization, it sounds like, and provide archives of articles that people, no matter what reason they come to journaling, are going to be able to access. So, wow, that's a huge, wonderful endeavor and a wonderful journaling legacy to leave for so many people. We have a few minutes left, and I'm wondering what topics about journaling you might want to bring up that we haven't brought up yet.
Well, all right, let's talk. One thing that we touched upon before and that I just want to not gloss over but make concrete or explicit is the concept of an inner critic. I mean, we did talk about how, freeing journal writing is, but in the end, you are dialoguing with yourself, and you do get into places that are, as you said, the dark places and the difficult places. And then there's another level to that, in a way, in which is the inner critic. So even though there's no one breathing down our neck, these people who we've incorporated into our being on some level, our parents, our teachers, our older siblings, our older cousins, whatever, we've created that own inner critic. And there's a whole process that just being aware of it is one of the big pieces, but there are ways that one can overcome one's own inner critic. And that's the kind of thing that in IAJW, there's information about it, there's articles, we have classes, there's a whole range of ways that you can learn how to be a better journaler, and knowing that there is such a thing as an inner critic and that there's a way to accept and overcome that inner critic is a big piece of being a journaler who's making progress in his or her development in whatever way it is, whether it's personal development or becoming a better writer. I mean, one of the big things that, people who want to write, oftentimes they are chastising themselves. Oh, that's not good enough. Oh, who cares about that? Or you're not a writer. All that inner talk prevents people from becoming a writer. I'm sure you bump into that a lot, Sheila, when you do your coaching for writing.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, whether you're playing the violin and wondering when you're going to make your next mistake and then you make it, or whether you're sitting at your desk with all this self-questioning that has nothing to do with what you want to write. It's just our difficulty in putting ourselves forward. It's very, very interfering, and it's very healthy to be able to understand what it is, like you're saying. And I guess for me, think of it as workarounds. It's not like you can definitely extract that critic, but you can certainly work around her.
That's right.
And I mean, you've mentioned many times writing. And writers write. That is the simplest definition of a writer. So anyone journaling is a writer and faces any of the writing life's problems and joys. So I wonder if you might address how a writer would specifically use journaling.
Well, actually, that's more up your alley, but I can certainly give some ideas about this, and please jump in at any point.
I will,
Sheila.
but I am sure you have lots of experience with your members.
Well, one thing, it's a great place to sort of warm up and exercise the writing muscle. It just is a place that you can write freely and get comfortable in your own skin.
I'm going to jump in, Ruth, right here, because that is an essential point. Writing is play, and we forget that because writing has, for so many years, for so many of us, whether it's on the job or from school, been a very serious matter. And journaling is serious, but it's also playful. As you said, a place for, experimenting with joy as well as sorrow. And I like what you said very much. We have got to learn to sit down and play. So continue. Thank you.
That's okay. I think it's a great place to find your voice. I think being a good writer oftentimes means having a voice, a style. You could probably define the word voice better than I. Do you want to jump in on that?
Well, actually, I want to jump in on a sort of related series. I'm one of these teachers who I'm not one who says you've got to study for years to find your voice. I actually think we know our voice. It's there. We have to release it. Finding your voice is actually the ability to release your true self. It's your voice.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
I totally agree. And I think the lack of anxiety and lack of feeling of an audience right there opens you up and allows you to release your voice as opposed to search for it, but release it. I think journaling also allows you to stay in touch with yourself. And writing is often about observation and perception, and it gives you the time, the space, the place to be observant and perceptive, and it also sort of shifts your mindset so that you become a person who is more observant and perceptive, because that's what writers are doing.
Right, absolutely. I am thinking of the transcendentalists as we speak. So one of the things I learned in researching for a book once was that transcendentalists shared their journal entries. They met together like a writer's group. I don't know that they corrected each other or talked about developing the work the way a writer's group would, but they responded to the feelings and thoughts that they were each keeping in their journals. And this is people like Emerson and Thoreau and Louisa May Alcott. So I know that the IAJW.org is a place where people can come to learn more about journaling. Is it also a place where they can, despite the fact that journaling is a private affair, share?
Exactly. And in fact, it's kind of one of those sort of paradoxical things where you indeed have privacy is a critical piece of journaling, but even sitting in a room together where everyone is journaling creates a certain amount of energy, and that's one way that there's sort of a group activity in journaling. Mm-hmm. And the other is, as you said, sharing, reading one's journal entries, and they don't necessarily have to be about some deep, dark secret, or they could, depending upon what you feel like doing. But even reading aloud a journal entry to someone is a powerful experience.
Right, because it's somebody witnessing something and making it more true because It's been heard. So on the site, with all the articles, are there either articles about or opportunities to share journal entries?
Actually, at this point, there aren't any places where there are classes where people have, online classes where people are teaching and students are in Google groups, actually, is what we use online, and people do share entries.
Good. So it's a group that's come together with journaling at its heart, and then they share aspects. So that was exactly what I was hoping was true. And okay. I am getting the message from Sheila that we're almost out of time, so I wanted to be very sure that we haven't skipped something that you'd really like to offer people about journaling. I want to say that I have appreciated your own articles about journaling and its place in your life and in the lives of others. And do you have perhaps a short anecdote about a recent journal entry or somebody who spoke about the significance or difference journaling made in their life?
That is a great question, and I'm scrambling at the moment to think of a good anecdote. Is one popping into your head, by the way?
Well, I'm thinking about when Mark was ill, some of the things you write in your piece of your newsletter. You write these little short essays to people about journaling.
Yeah. I write them a lot. Yeah, one of the this is. Once a month, I put out a LifeJournal newsletter, which is you just have to sign up on LifeJournal.com to do that. But every month, writing about some aspect of journaling, and one of the aspects that I think is very common to people is there's a certain bit of reluctance or resistance to write. I wrote an article about the same feeling that I had as a kid, of when, it was after dinner and your mother yells, bath time, and the last thing you want to do is take your clothes off and jump into the bathtub, even though it's warm, inviting, and fun. There's something about that, even that millisecond where you are cold. I grew up in the Northeast, and that wintertime you had to jump into, take your clothes off and jump into the bathtub, and just that transition was something I hated to do. And there's that same feeling that people oftentimes get, that little resistance to writing. And I would encourage people to know that, remember how fun it was once you got into the bathtub and there were bubbles and boats and all kinds of things that made the whole experience fun and you didn't want to leave. Well, it's that same kind of feeling about journaling. Once you get started with pen to paper or fingers to keyboard, you jump in, you dive into another world that is one that is separate and fun and exciting. And it would be fabulous if you could sort of remember how much fun it is once you get started, and to try to ignore that little edge of resistance and
Thank you, Ruth.
slide right in.
What I'm thinking about is how when I sit down to write, whatever I'm going to sit down to write, I think I'm going to focus on the bubbles. And how much fun that's going to be, and get myself to sit down. So I really appreciate that story. Thank you so much. We're out of time, so I want to thank you again for being with us and talking to us from Sarasota. We'll have a second conversation soon, I hope. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Sheila.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to In Conversation with Sheila Bender, discussions on the writing life. If you have a writing challenge, author, or question you'd like us to include in future conversations, email us at sbender@writingitreal.com. Producer, sound engineer, and editor Sheila Kalav. Executive producer Larry Stein, and announcer Kurt Vanderslice. You are listening to KPTZ 91.9 FM, Port Townsend.